Hello. Today we're going to be giving staff collections training on the 1918 American-LaFrance Model T chemical truck. So American-LaFrance was one of three major firefighting vehicle manufacturers in the United States, along with Irons Fox and Seagrave. In 1910, American-LaFrance began offering motorized gas fire engines, and they decided to use Ford Model T conversion for their light-duty first responder firefighting vehicle. Using Ford Model T conversion as their firefighting vehicle was much more cost effective compared to other fire vehicle manufacturers during this time. Due to its reliability and low cost, the Model T was frequently the first motorized fire apparatus in many small communities. In addition to chemical vehicles, American-LaFrance offered chief cars, hose wagons, and pumpers. So for these LaFrance chemical trucks, the tanks are filled with water into which 10 pounds of bicarbonate soda is dissolved. Sulfuric acid is placed in a glass receptacle near the top of the tank. To charge the tank, it is merely rotated to allow the acid to dump and mix with the soda and water. As a result, the result is a chemical reaction that forces water out of the hose. When one tank is expended, the other is activated while the first is recharged, extending the service of the tanks beyond their 50-gallon combined capacity. So some history on this specific sort of vehicle in the museum. At the end of its service life, this American-LaFrance chemical truck was acquired by a man named Jerome Black in Farmington, Maine. He used the truck to fight fires, utilized the chemical tanks as reservoirs from which he filled Indian tanks. He drove this truck through his teen years and then placed it in storage in 1949. Jerome Black then sold this chemical truck to Owl's Head Transportation Museum in 1986.
Now, Jonah covered some of the specifics of the car. And specifically the fire apparatus. I'll talk a little bit about the Model T. You could go to a Ford dealer at that time and purchase a commercial chassis, is what they called it. And it was all of the Model T except for the body. And generally speaking, you didn't get the rear fenders either, but they were certainly easy to get. I'm sure that Farmington Fire Department or the town of Farmington bought this new because underneath the red paint, you'll see very shiny black paint. And so they took a commercial chassis and bought the American-LaFrance kit and put it together. A little bit about Ford Motor Company. Henry Ford, and we'll get up to this, he called the Model T the universal car, which at that time meant you could use it for anything. Now we have Tesla has a universal car and it's out in the universe somewhere. Little different, same name. Henry Ford just grew up on a farm, was really interested in mechanical things, and he actually formed, to keep the story short, he formed two companies before the Ford Motor Company. And it was the Detroit Automobile Company, not to be confused with the Detroit Car Company. And then the Ford Company, not to be confused with the Ford Motor Company, which is the one that's here today. The first two companies failed, and he was able to, through his racing prowess, get interested a dozen or so backers who had the money. Henry Ford didn't put any money into the company whatsoever. It was just his name and engineering that he put into Ford Motor Company. And they started out in 1903. He went up through the alphabet, okay, from Model A in 1903, not the Model A that's in your mind probably, 1903 all the way up, and they had a Model B and a C, and then a K, which was a dismal failure as well. Big six-cylinder car, very heavy, but it only had a planetary transmission. It just didn't do well. Seal Cove has one. It's interesting, and it's been down here. I had a chance to drive it, and I could see why it failed. But then, in Henry's mind, he wanted to build a car for the masses. That's where he thought that the that the fortunes lay, and he was right. But he had a board of directors to make happy too, and they thought the money was in the high-priced cars like the K. K was $2,500. But Ford kind of had his way. He made a series of 3 models. They were very much the same, the N, the R, and the S. And if you look at any of those cars, you can definitely see the Model T lineage in those 3 cars. But he was also fighting a battle with the Selden patent at that time. And there was a big fear that if you bought a Ford car that you were going to be listed in that patent suit that was going on. So it kind of hampered the first, although people wanted those cars. I forget how many of the ends that he was able to pre-sell. I should have looked that number up, even with the Selden patent problem. The Selden patent is a really interesting study to do if you like that sort of thing. And so Ford refused to pay royalties to Selden. But in the meantime, all the other big manufacturers like Packard had formed the ALAM, American League of Auto Manufacturers, paying royalties to Selden. And they were a business bloc that was not going to let anybody else into their clubhouse. And but Ford said, "Heck with you! I'm going to build it." So he ignored Selden, and of course Selden turned around and sued him, and because Ford had already sued Selden so that he could be free of the Selden patent, and he lost. All right. Not too long after that, he started building these N, R, and S's himself, and Selden sued him instead. Along comes the Model T in 1908. It was the model year for 1909, but just like cars today, they start manufacturing the next year's models in about October, and that's when Ford was beginning to manufacture the Model T. Built a couple of factories as things progressed, and when it progressed up to about this time, Ford wanted to buy out the company, which was owned by the backers of the company, including Dodge Brothers. Dodge was making the cast iron pieces, mechanical pieces for a lot of different cars, and including Ford. So he wanted to buy out his shareholders, and he ended up doing it in 1919, making him the sole owner of Ford Motor Company. And he was able to not have to deal with people that only wanted to make cars like the K or anything like that. So he was off on a big roll about 1919 with the Model T. Now, of course, it came out model year 1909. And by the time he was done with the Model T in 1927, he'd produced over 15 million Model Ts. Made him the richest person on earth at that time. And he had worked hard to neutralize World War I that was looming, and failed. It happened anyway. But he continued to build these, and his board of directors did not also want him to build a tractor. And once he was free of all that, he started building Fords and tractors with his son, Edsel. So Ford and Son. And so it's an interesting story of how he went from just a kid on a farm to the wealthiest man on earth. I've said there's 2 major things that have changed history from a human point of view. One is oil and the car, okay, those together, individual transportation, and the other one is electricity and the computer. And those are extremely large turning points in how we live, the population of the world, what goes on today, how we do things. So this is a great example of an original Model T. This is not restored. I met the gentleman that gave it to me. He didn't give it, he sold it to the museum. That's another story, but I won't get into that. Because we don't buy anything, right? But I've heard from the town of Farmington that they weren't real happy that that the owner sold it, but then again they sold it to him. So and I'd like to get it back out to Farmington someday for their big Farmington Days or 4th of July parade or something like that. We almost made it a number of years ago. Ethan was going to take it out there, and I forget what got in the way. Something got in the way, yeah. So this is all original. Of course, it does runs pretty good. It is a Model T. It showed up with a bunch of parts. I handed it to the Farmington Fire Department. They didn't throw anything away off this car. It showed back up here with different wheels on it and pieces, bits and pieces. And so we set about to put it back original the way it was. They gave us the original wheels, which was nice, and all of that. And the engine, this is kind of interesting. The engine has a little vibration in it. And in the parts that they gave us was one piston and connecting rod. Ford made different weights of piston and connecting rod. I have a suspicion that a rod went bad or a piston and rod went bad, and they replaced it with another one and never bothered to figure out the weight. And so there's a little bit of a vibration in it, but we're not fighting fires with it. So we're not. But, you know, we have not rung the bell on it yet. Kids love this truck. This was one of Charlie's favorite vehicles to drive around. Put the kids in it and drive it around. Yeah, it was like his personal car. So I think that I've run out of basically things to say because I have talked about Model Ts before, and this one is no different. The controls are the same. It's your basic Model T. And I put out this advertisement that anybody who wants to learn how to drive a Model T, just come and see me and say, okay, can you go out and what can you teach me? And by the time the summer rolls around, you'll be driving a Model T around. I don't guarantee you won't run people over driving it around, but at least you can drive it around. Any questions? Model T questions?
How did Ford settle the suit? Did the patent run out before the T?
It went to court,
Okay.
and the court. Well, that's a good question. What happened is he took the Selden patent car, because when you get a patent, you have to submit to the patent bureau in the government, and it has to have blueprints, drawings, and explanations on how it works. So Ford went out and built one. Didn't work. Okay, so it was a two-stroke engine. It looked like a wagon. Ford's premise was that Selden had put a patent on the entire automobile, everything. Okay, just this blanket patent. Back when nobody really knew what a car was, I guess you could do that. And so Ford built a Selden car. Might still be in the Ford Museum. I'm not sure. And it failed the test of an automobile. And that's how we got that. Yep.
All those other models, A, B, C, D, are they in the Ford Museum?
Oh, yeah, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I didn't know they were all.
Yeah. Yeah, the progression goes, and this is a question I'm asked on the floor quite a bit. People come in that want to say something about a Model A, you know, where did Ford start or whatever. He built that Model A. It was largely an assembled car. Okay, he bought the running gear from Dodge Brothers, and he bought the body from I don't know who, and the wheels and all of that, and put the car together. And he was doing that until he could put a factory together, and then he started building more and more. His goal, his stated goal, was that he would be the sole manufacturer of every part in the Model T. He bought rubber tree plants in South America. He did it all. Yeah. Another one that the women might be interested in was he was all about equal rights. He paid the women the same as he paid men, $5 a day, which was huge. That was double what anybody else was making in the auto business. And the women mostly built the coils and magneto assemblies, but they They had the same opportunity in the Ford plant to make the same money. And he also advertised. People say, this is every man's car, and I've heard people say, well, that just means this. So you know, yeah. And but his advertising was a lot. A lot of the advertising was for women. Escape the drudgery of the kitchen on the farm, and get out in the clean country air and all of that kind of stuff. As a matter of fact, I had a couple of women-oriented advertising framed in the shop somewhere. It'll be up in the new shop.
You should go through some of the old ads. I bet you
Yeah,
got some good examples. I'll
right.
take a peek.
I didn't finish up the NR. He worked his way up through the alphabet to the T, okay, and some are missing, and those were cars that died on the drawing board, okay. And then he did the T, and he did not want to get rid of the T. I mean, the T is what made his money. You look at a Model T, and you're looking at Henry Ford. Prior to that, he's working, as you can see him working his way, and evading problems all the way up to the T. When he got to the T and made so much money, nobody was going to tell him anything. Yeah, I mean, he was the boss at that point. But then what? His wife and Edsel wanted to be done with the T in 1926 and 7. They were really giving pressure on Henry to be done with the T. And because all the other manufacturers, like the Chevy that Bob's leaning on, so they look the same, but they're very much advanced compared to a Model T. And so they knew that Henry was going to have to come out with something new, his engineers. Henry didn't want to do it, but he finally succumbed. And he closed down auto manufacturing plant for like 6 months. It was long. And all his dealers were crying. They didn't have any product to sell and everything. But he was engineering up the new Model A. So when people say, a question about the Model A, it's like, which one? The one, 1903 or 1928? You have this model. And Henry's thing was he wanted to wipe the slate clean, re-engineer a whole new car, and start the alphabet all over again. And so you've got a Model A of 1903, you got one of 28, 29, 30, and 31. So there's the Model A. And he went to Model B, and he went to a Model C, and then it kind of fizzled out. And he gave the cars names. Yeah. So didn't use the A, B, C, and D. A lot of other manufacturers were doing the same thing, giving their cars that they make just a letter designation. You'll see a lot of cars with Model K or whatever. Anybody else?
If anybody wants to see the alphabet cars, go to Kincaid Avenue Museum. It has a very, very good digital imaging of their complete collection, and they have all of the letter cars there.
Who's that?
You can do a walk around. It's a Kincaid Avenue plant.
Piquet.
In Dearborn. You can do a virtual tour all the way around the cars, under the hoods, all 9 yards. It's a very good display.
Piquet Avenue was his second, I think, large factory. At Mack Avenue plant, then Piquet. It's in Detroit, and the building never got torn down. Still stands. There was a laundromat in the bottom floor of it for a number of years. The upper floor is completely unrestored, and so this Piquet organization was able to purchase the building and purchase the laundromat, and after they were through cleaning their clothes, started to put new windows in the whole place. Yep, it's a very good museum. Very good museum. Yeah. Yeah, Piquette. Yeah. Yep.
Just look up Kincaid Avenue.
Yeah. I've seen a picture of the Piquet Avenue plant quite a few times in the old days, back when Ford was in it. And Detroit was a very different looking place. It was up and coming and clean and, you know, all of that. Now the Kincaid Ave plant is stuffed in between other buildings. When Ford had it, he had a foundry there. Like I said, his attempts to create the entire vehicle, you can see it in these photographs. So, fun stuff. I like history.
Thank you. Awesome.
Certainly. Okay.